could get you to take your seats, please. Well, thank you very much. As you all know, our featured speaker tonight is Miles White, but what maybe you don't know is that Miles and I are very good friends. Among other things, once or twice a year we go bird hunting together. I think both our wives subscribe to the theory that if you cook a man a pheasant, you feed him for a day. But if you send him off to hunt for pheasants, you get rid of him for the whole week. In any case, I can tell you from experience that Miles is a very good shot, actually. But he's also found himself in the crosshairs a few times during his tenure as chairman and CEO at Abbott. You know, it's one thing to disagree with the FDA. It's something else again when you get the nuns mad at you. But Miles has met the issues and the challenges head on and helped make Abbott one of the most successful and respected companies in its industry. He didn't start out, by the way, looking for a career in the pharmaceutical business. After getting his engineering degree and MBA from Stanford, he worked for a while as a consultant at McKinsey. And back in the 80s, he was exploring opportunities in Silicon Valley, believe it or not. Who knows? He might have hooked up with some high-tech startup, sold his stock for billions, and bought his own pro basketball team by now. But instead, in favor to a friend, he interviewed with Abbott. And the rest, as they say, is history. He was elected to the board in 1998 and named to his present post a year later. Last year, he was also chosen to represent his entire industry as chairman of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers Association of America, a job that some say makes him one of the most influential CEOs. As if all that weren't enough, Miles is also very active in civic and charitable affairs. He's a trustee for Northwestern University, the Joffrey Ballet of Chicago, and the Culver Educational Foundation. He's deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and vice chairman of the board for the Field Museum. And I was going to say that he's also vice chairman of the Economic Club, but now I can say he's chairman-elect of the Economic Club. Miles' success is no surprise to those who know him. He has everything it takes: the people skills, strategic insight, he even looks the part. He's been called the CEO from Central Casting. I think it was a quote actually from Miles. Above all, he has a perfect outlook. He expects success, and nothing discourages him. I mentioned earlier that he's a good shot, but on one of our hunting trips, he took careful aim at a high-flying, fast duck, and he missed. He turned to me and he said, "Jim, we both just saw a miracle. There flies a dead duck." That's a positive attitude, and it serves him well both as CEO and civic leader. It also makes him a good friend and a good speaker. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce the chairman and CEO of Abbott, Miles White.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that unpredictable and warm introduction. You always hold your breath when he's talking about you. Thank you all for being here tonight to listen to a local friend. I'm honored that you're all here, really honored. This isn't something I expected to do, and had my arm twisted and thought, well, good opportunity. I'll tell you what I think about health care. I'll do my best to make your time worthwhile. I'll present a few ideas that you may not have considered before about something that affects us all, health care. And I think that these are subjects that we all need to think about because change is coming to our system, and we need to be ready to guide it in the best channel when that time arrives. 7 years ago, I was the president of an operating division of Abbott. Thought I had a tough job. I didn't know how easy I had it at the time. I was locked in the sheltered environment of an operating company I enjoyed running the division, creating and building products, marketing them to laboratories around the world. Actually, I thought it was one of the best jobs there was. And then I got a new job, this one. And my work life changed. When I first became CEO, I thought that this was going to be like running that division, just on a much larger scale. And I couldn't have been more wrong, because I found myself involved in more than just running a business. In fact, I don't do much running of a business anymore. I suddenly found myself at the nexus of multiple, difficult, ongoing, and sometimes harsh debates on some of the most critical healthcare challenges that we face as a nation and as a global society. Healthcare has been in the news a lot lately, in recent years especially, perhaps more than we certainly would choose to be. But that comes with the territory and something that's so vital to people's lives. To review just some of the more prominent issues that we're grappling with today: providing prescription drug coverage for seniors, helping the 40 million Americans who lack any health insurance, the broader safety questions recently raised by Vioxx, Bextra, and Celebrex, devising rational regulations that protect patients but don't hinder innovation, and the debate around patents and generics and how to preserve what's best about our system and allow investors to earn a return on the capital they put at risk. And those are just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. They don't begin to get at issues such as political trade wars over other countries' free riding on U.S. R&D investments by controlling their prices, a malpractice system that's designed originally to help protect patients but is now wildly out of balance, the rising costs of our research and development, how to provide health care in the developing world. I could go on. But there's one overarching question that's probably the simplest but most important question of all, the one that underlies all the others, and the one I want to emphasize tonight. Do we want a system that allows us and the medical science that we develop to pursue longer and better quality lives? Or do we want a system that implicitly says, we're living long enough, let's just ration properly to control our costs? You can't be the chief executive of a large pharmaceutical or medical products company today and not be in the middle of all of these debates. So tonight, I'm going to take a look at the healthcare situation in the United States and offer a point of view regarding some of the key questions we face as a nation. I've tried to crystallize those into a half dozen or so overarching themes, namely, is there a crisis in healthcare? What's right with our healthcare system? Has our investment been worth it? Will it continue to be? Do we know what we want from our healthcare system? What's caused the cost of healthcare to rise so much? And how do we best deal with what is undoubtedly a pretty difficult cost crisis? And what should we expect going forward? And as we briefly consider these big questions in an admittedly limited amount of time, I will not ignore the obvious, those things that no one wants to say or admit about healthcare. Let's recognize the reality in the seriousness of these issues for all of us as individuals, as leaders of our community, and as citizens of our nation. These questions, which underlie all healthcare policy, are quite literally long-term matters of life and death. They ultimately influence how we live and perhaps when and how we will die. The other big fundamental fact to recognize at the outset is that these are our questions to answer and our issues to solve. We can debate ad infinitum what pocket the money should come from: insurance companies, employers, doctors, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, pharmacies, the government, patients. But it all comes down to the same thing. Whichever of these societal pockets the dollars come from, we pay. We pay in taxes or premiums or fees, or we pay in lack of access, lack of quality, lack of progress. So this is our question to answer and ours to solve. So, to the questions. Is there a crisis in healthcare? There is. Pick up the Washington Post and you might conclude Social Security reform is the biggest domestic issue demanding attention today. But if you ask the business community, you'll get a different answer. To paraphrase a former presidential campaign slogan, it's healthcare, stupid. And it's specifically the ever-rising cost of care. In fact, a recent survey of CFOs of major corporations found that 2/3 of them believe immediate action on this issue is very important. Less than half felt that way about Social Security. Our cost crisis is not limited to the funding of Medicare or state budget challenges with Medicaid. Frankly, what we're facing is rapidly rising spending on health care generally. As noted recently in the New York Times, this isn't primarily the result of medical price inflation. It's overwhelmingly a result of innovation. The range of things that medicine can do, and do remarkably well, just keeps getting broader and better. And that's good news, not bad. But it has come with high costs. As one of our peer companies, GlaxoSmithKline, put it in a series of ads, I quote, "Today's medicines finance tomorrow's miracles," end quote. And those miracles don't come cheap. They don't say that last part. Our steady investment in innovation over the past 40 years has made dramatic improvements in our health and the way that we live. For example, pharmaceutical advancements alone between 1960 and 2000 have dramatically improved health and survival. Just a few examples. In 1963, the year in which the measles vaccine was first launched, there were 3 to 4 million U.S. cases of the disease. By 2003, there were only 54 confirmed U.S. measles cases. In 1968, there were 1.3 million deaths from coronary artery disease. The introduction of new treatments in the 80s and 90s, such as ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, and thrombolytics and stents, led to a 61% decrease in deaths by the year 2000. In 1995, people with HIV had a 73% death rate. Just 5 years later, in 2000, thanks to the introduction of new medicines, people with HIV had a 64% survival rate. In 1997, that recently, only 50% of people with chronic myelogenous leukemia lived 1.5 years past diagnosis. Because of the introduction of kinase inhibitors, only 5 years later, the survival rate has risen to 89%. Those are miraculous results, and there are many more like them. I use these illustrations to show just a sample of the many medical innovations that continue to make dramatic differences in the length and the quality of the lives that we lead. Today, healthcare innovators, pharmaceutical, medical device companies, are spending $50 billion a year in research and development of pharmaceuticals and another $10 billion a year on medical devices. Over the past 50 years, we've seen an increase in our population's life expectancy from 68 years to 77 years. And this is directly attributable to the advancement of medical science since about World War II. From 1900 to that time, increases were due primarily to decreased infant mortality thanks to improved sanitation and vaccinations. Gains since then have been driven by improved healthcare techniques and technologies. What often goes unrecognized is that included in the cost of the medicines and devices and the healthcare that we purchase is the cost of investment in research and development of the new products and technologies of the future. The purchasers of pharmaceuticals and medical products in one decade fund the advancements of the next decade, and that's been increasingly more expensive over time. The next question is, has this investment been worth it? Well, the case against was probably best stated in that famous quote attributed to John Maynard Keynes, "In the long run, we're all dead." In other words, healthcare is money down the drain. We're investing in a disposable asset, us. A similar point was made somewhat less grimly in a BC comic strip that I've held on to. It's set like many life lessons on the golf course. BC, the caveman, is teaching his friend, the cave woman, the fundamentals of golf. They're standing on a golf green. She's holding the club. And she says to him, "So let me get this straight. The fewer times I hit the ball, the better I'm doing." And he said, "That's right." And she says, "Well, then why do it at all?" Keynes's point and the cave woman's are the same. Take anything to such an extreme, and the conclusion is, why bother? Well, I think why we bother is self-evident, at least in healthcare. I'm not so sure about golf. In healthcare, we do it because we value the precious and finite gift of life. We cannot sit by and do nothing in the face of human suffering, and we cannot forego the opportunities we have to serve life by extending it, improving it, by sanctifying it with our commitment, our skills, and our resources. Medicine is a risky business and a huge social cost, but it's one that actually provides a very high return, not just morally and ethically, but economically as well. So to that question, has all the investment in healthcare been worth it? I think the answer has to be a resounding yes. And the evidence says so, though I'll spare you the involved formulas that show you how. More importantly, we've improved human health, lengthened life, and decreased suffering. A society can make no better investment, but it is an enormous investment. Several years ago, our oldest son asked me a surprisingly insightful question. He said, "Dad, if you, the pharmaceutical companies, actually succeed in extending human life, and people actually live much longer than they do today, say to 90 or 100 years old or more, how are we going to afford that?" Well, his question was spot on. It's not just the cost of the health care we're having trouble affording, it's the living. And it gets to the essence of something very important. For the first time in history, many of our biggest health challenges are no longer scientific, they're social. Put another way, the very success we've had in extending and improving the quality of life through medical discovery has raised some major societal questions to answer. And we don't entirely appreciate the ramifications of that yet. And that's why our son's question is seconded by governments, think tanks, universities, and especially by patients. Because one of the greatest challenges that we face today is demographics. We see it written a lot. Inexorable demographics. We're aging. We're going to live longer and be healthier, which carries further costs. And we're not saving enough in advance to afford us, as individuals or as a society. Life is expensive, and we can't afford it. We are not evolving our social systems, our habits, and our practices in step with our technology and the implications it has for the way we live. Because frankly, it's difficult to ask ourselves the tough questions, and we don't like to hear some of the answers. But we have to ask ourselves the questions that matter. We have to determine what we really want from our healthcare system before we can determine how to achieve those goals. Is the most important thing innovation? Continually advancing the capabilities of medical technology? Or is the most important thing access? Allowing more people to share in a more equal level of care? Do we think healthcare is a right, or merely a commodity or service to be purchased by consumers who can afford it? How should we deal with terminal illness? Do we really want to live to be 90, 100, 110? I do, parenthetically. By and large, I don't believe that most people define their aspirations for health and life in such terms or in big numbers. But I think that we all do desire fullness of body and mind for as long as we can enjoy them. I think most of us would like to make it well into our 80s and beyond. This is something modern medicine has made possible to a remarkable extent. And more progress in this direction is not only possible, but probable. Increasingly today, more people make it in good order to an older age. But as my son pointed out, it's not without consequences. Living longer means spending larger and longer. Is it possible for it not to also mean working longer? We have this arbitrary retirement age of 65. You know how that came to be? Because at the time it was set as a milestone, that's how long people were expected to live. That was the life expectancy. The idea was for people to just reach that brass ring briefly. not to live for decades longer, which is where we are today. It was based on a different economic model. And frankly, at some point, we may have to readdress this as we begin to be retired longer than we worked. And as our retirements grow longer than our work lives and longer than our retirement compensation systems were constructed to afford. Many people will have to work longer in order to afford just living. And increasingly, they'll be healthy enough to do so. Our social and economic model will be forced to change. And we will have to participate, all of us, more knowingly and more directly in paying for it. So I return to the question, what do we want from our healthcare system? As Americans, of course, we tend to want everything. And we think of health as an entitlement or a right. We want the highest standard of care in the world. We want the system to continue to incent innovation and improvement and research of new and better technologies. And that's why U.S. companies today produce more medical advancements than the rest of the world combined. The engine that is research and development is almost entirely a private sector engine, where capital is put at risk to pursue the next innovations. And we all want access to those innovations. We all want to benefit from them. And generally, I think we believe that everyone ought to have equal access to them. And finally, we want all this to be free. It's been said that any two of these desires, quality, access, and low cost, which I substitute for free, can be satisfied, but not all three. Which then would you do without? Will we accept less than optimal care? Will we accept an end to medical progress? Will we say, 80's long enough for anyone? Now let's just distribute it more evenly. But you know what? That's expensive too. On the other hand, would we consider allowing a medical caste system to persist in which some people receive care and others don't, while the help they need is available? That's the AIDS crisis in Africa. Should we even consider accepting either of these options? I'd say no to all these questions and expect that you'd feel the same. And we have said no to this already. We largely rejected managed care because we wouldn't accept having our choices limited by so-called gatekeepers when it comes to our health. But there are those on the other side of this argument. One former Western governor has concluded that today we have as much medical technology as we need or should have. He takes the position publicly that technology has brought us unbearable burdens and unanswerable questions. As he puts it, and I quote, "We simply have invented and discovered more things to do to our aging bodies than our aging society can afford to pay for." This sounds to me a bit like the head of the U.S. Patent Office, who in 1899 stated that everything that can be invented has been invented. I think it's a bit short-sighted, because tomorrow's advancements may reduce the cost of today's system. It would be a disservice to ourselves and to mankind not to continue to evolve and improve on the rapid pace of developments in medicine over the last 50 years. So do we accept such an extreme anti-innovation approach? I do not. This is essentially the approach of European and other government-run health systems, particularly the English, the Germans, and the French. They keep costs down through 6 tactics that limit their people's choices. And we're often compared to the health systems in those countries. Let me tell you about those 6 tactics. First, they have what I call closed-loop systems. The government controls all the variables so they can unilaterally choose low-cost approaches on behalf of their population. The government is, in effect, the provider and the payer. Second, they don't have the cost of malpractice that is such a huge factor in the U.S. Third, they use price controls on new technologies that, in effect, allow them to free ride on others, primarily U.S. innovation, and it is a fact that we in the U.S. subsidize the rest of the world through that. Fourth, they pay their doctors a great deal less than their American counterparts. It's one of the reasons that we, the pharmaceutical and medical device companies, can hire so many of them for our sales forces. Fifth, because they are single closed-loop systems, they don't have a lot of the middlemen and functions in their systems that we have in ours. And last, they ration care. They implicitly accept a fixed life expectancy of around 80 years or even less, and they say that's enough. And they make choices as well between what they deem to be must-have health care and nice-to-have health care. They'll pay for your asthma therapy, but they're not going to pay for your baldness treatment. And they probably got that part right. They consciously make the decision to provide enough care for all and to let needs that they deem less valuable or less efficient or too costly go unmet. We've not accepted such aggressive management of healthcare cost in the U.S. I don't mean to criticize those systems. It's just not what we as a society have been willing to do. And that brings us back to the nagging question that's always in the air and a lot lately, the one that's on the minds of CEOs, CFOs, HR heads, our government leaders, and the one that's at the core of our crisis. How do we do this less expensively? And that's a lot more difficult to answer. It is possible to lower our cost, but the advances that we seek in medicine today are not going to be cheap. Quality and innovation are expensive propositions. That's inescapable, and we made it so. Back in the 1970s, it cost us about $140 million, we the pharmaceutical companies, to bring a drug to market. That was the cost of the R&D and the entire process to come to market. In the 1980s, it grew to about $320 million per drug. By 2001, it was more than $800 million, and today it's estimated to be nearing $1 billion per drug, real cost. Why is that? Because in the last 30 years, the number of subjects in clinical trials required for a drug filing has almost tripled. The complexity of the clinical trials and the answers we look for in them are increasing dramatically. The safety hurdles that drugs must clear are rising, and all of this adds heavily to cost. Today, only 1 in 10,000 compounds found in the lab is ever tested in man, and only 1 in 10 of those ever makes it to market. And of the ones that make it to market, only 3 of every 10 make it to market and recoup their costs of investment. On top of that, it takes us an average of 9 years to develop that one survivor or successful medication. So yes, the cost of creating new medical technologies keeps rising because we demand more and more from those technologies and safety. And that drives prices accordingly. But it doesn't begin to account for the degree of increase that we see in all of our health care. Why then has our healthcare spending risen so significantly over the past 50 or 60 years? The answer is stunningly simple. As I said earlier, we now have legitimate things to spend healthcare dollars on. We have fantastic technologies in medicines and devices and capabilities that we didn't have before, and they're making a profound difference in people's lives. In fact, if you go back to see how far healthcare has come in just the last century, you'd be stunned by some of the things that passed for medicine given our current standards. I brought along an example for you. I don't know if there's I guess you can see that. I'll hold it up for you. This is from our archives at Abbott, but I want you to note this is not an Abbott product. It was made, however, by another Chicago-based manufacturer around the turn of the 20th century. This was a bottle of William Radham's Microbe Killer. It cost $1 for this bottle, says so right here, which would be about $22 today, or about the price of a 1-month prescription for Abbott's thyroid medication, Synthroid. And if it had worked, Mr. Radham's elixir would have been quite a bargain, because as its label plainly declares, this fine healthcare product, quote, is a positive and certain cure for all diseases and is guaranteed to be perfectly harmless. There's more. It will effect a cure in every instance if given fair trial. What that means is buy more of it. This miracle tonic consisted of water charged with gases generated from flowers of sulfur on the bottle, nitrate of soda, black oxide of manganese, sandalwood, and chlorate of potash. So it smelled like medicine anyway. And that's about as close as it came. And it makes that prescription for Synthroid look like the true value it is, because for the same price, it actually does something vitally important, in fact, for the millions of people suffering from thyroid deficiency. Medicine has come a long way, and it's still advancing at a phenomenal rate. In fact, with the deciphering of the genome, we believe the most important medical discoveries are still before us. So when it comes to rising healthcare costs, we are the victims of our own medical progress and success. The primary driver of this spiral is our medical progress. There are many, many ways today to spend money on healthcare that provide a real return. And they are expensive, as innovation usually is. And they are likely to be so going forward as well. There are some costs we are just not going to escape as long as we wish to continue improving and extending life. That human desire for extended life and better health isn't going to change. And that's exactly what we're achieving. The last time the U.S. Census was done, life expectancy rose again by another year, due primarily to reductions in death from cancer and heart disease. There are other reasons that our costs have risen rapidly. Greater effectiveness and utilization are driving healthcare spending around the world. A unique burden of the U.S. system, as I mentioned earlier, is the cost of medical malpractice, which has gotten a lot of attention from doctors in hospitals in the past few years, and well it should. Medical malpractice litigation is estimated now to add nearly $100 billion annually to the cost of hospital and physician services. In fact, doctors will tell you today their fastest rising cost, the one that they can't control, is the cost of their medical malpractice insurance to protect themselves from lawsuits. At the same time, we have the most regulated healthcare system in the world. Our threshold for safety and our zero tolerance for errors have driven more cost into research, into insurance, and into litigation. If we insist on an error-free system, which of course cannot be achieved in any case, rather than one where we have a balance between risk and benefit, then we're going to pay heavily for all the safeguards that it requires. Further, the cost of today's medical advancement is more expensive. We're working on much tougher scientific targets now than we did before. We've already gathered all the low-hanging fruit. The remaining needs seem more challenging, but every bit as worthy. So we're working on much more sophisticated technology, and that too adds cost to the system. And one of the things that we as manufacturers and researchers have learned is that we're going to have to devote a fair portion of that technology and our know-how to improving and the efficiency and reducing the costs of our research and development. And finally, costs are rising because healthcare is actually working, and as I said earlier, affecting demographics. There's a circular dimension here. Thanks to continuous innovation over the past century, people are living longer. Older people require more health care, and more of them means more health care still. The demographic shift in the age of our population is driving our costs higher much faster, and that's not going to cease anytime soon because we, the baby boomers, are just arriving. So the question is, what do we do about cost, and where's the right balance? Well, there are things we can do, but the first thing to recognize is where the cost really is. The pharmaceutical industry has gotten an awful lot of attention over the past 4 or 5 years for the cost of prescription medicines. But the fact of the matter is today that of total health care costs in the United States, pharmaceuticals are only about 11% of the total. The largest cost is hospital care at 31% of our costs, followed by doctors at 22% of our costs. And embedded in the costs of doctors and hospitals are the costs of medical malpractice insurance, litigation, their pay, their fees, etc. Also built into these costs is the mind-boggling amount of administrative waste, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on tonight. So let's talk about some potential solutions. And there are a couple that over time our policymakers ought to be incorporating into healthcare policy as it evolves in this country. The first is to pay for results. for quality care that demonstrates improved health. And the implications of that are far-reaching. It means that we have to change some of the compensation and incentive structure in our systems. The current system pays for quantity, not quality. We need to redesign the compensation system so that healthcare providers are rewarded for quality, because quality care is something worth investing in, and because it can drive out further costs by providing good outcomes that eliminate the need for further care and costs. We need to ensure that people are getting care that we know works. We need good healthcare information so we can identify best practices and establish standards around them. One example I'll give you. A health plan based in Minnesota incented its doctors to manage health to focus on the benefit of health care, not just the cost. And this led them to do things that were good for patients' ongoing health, not just to treat them when their health failed. They instituted a bonus system that paid doctors to achieve goals, such as blood sugar and cholesterol levels below certain levels. And they achieved an improvement of more than 200% in those measures. So we can drive results that deliver better health and savings. Problem, though, is where those savings go and who's incented to achieve them. The Minnesota program I mentioned cost $330 per patient and delivered expected savings of $30,000 over each patient's life, but the insurer got only a small payback for that effort. Patients benefited, employers benefited from lower absenteeism, Medicare will ultimately benefit, but members move on, so the health plan that delivers the care doesn't have a strong incentive to do or to sustain such work. That's why, as a society, we don't do enough with vaccination. Too often, the payer doesn't capture the ultimate value. Employers do to some extent, and that's why so many vaccinations take place at work. So we need to find ways to incent good health decisions and practices at the appropriate points in the system, and I think that's a role our government can play a much bigger role in. Structuring our system around building and preserving health is one way to improve outcomes and reduce costs. We also need medical malpractice reform and tort reform, and we need to balance that badly broken system. Clearly, we have to protect the rights of patients who are injured, but we must also reserve that step as a recourse only in matters of true misdoing. Today, the courts are exploited. We need to fix the system so that doctors don't have to practice defensive medicine, that is, ordering unnecessary tests or procedures simply to protect themselves in the event of a lawsuit. We need to cap awards at reasonable levels that provide relief for patients that have truly been harmed, but at the same time doesn't create an excessive burden and cost that it is today. We also need to have much greater transparency of the costs and the profits in the system. We have to know who makes the money and where. The healthcare system today is a complex tangle of payments and rebates that in some cases incent the wrong actions, such as prescribing medications that are neither the best nor even the cheapest option, but can be the most lucrative for the provider. With greater transparency of costs, physicians and patients can determine together the most appropriate therapy, taking all factors into consideration. Today, we do not have a true free market system because patients and doctors do not have visibility to the actual cost that they impose upon payers, that is, insurers or governments. The problem with the U.S. healthcare system is not that we have too much free market, it's that we don't have enough information to have a truly free market. Information about costs and outcomes that can help make our free market system work for patients and physicians alike. There is enormous opportunity to improve the management of healthcare information, to save immensely on administrative expenses, minimize prescription and medical errors, and to make health records more portable and accessible. Improve healthcare information systems that incorporate outcomes data and cost data will help link payers and providers, closing that loop in the system and allowing more optimal, cost-effective care. Let me speak a moment about cost effectiveness. Mark McClellan, the former FDA commissioner and the current head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is a strong advocate of both pay-for-performance and cost-effectiveness measures and has started a half a dozen pilots to test various incentives, which I think is a good idea. A unique guy to do it because he's got a medical doctor degree and is an economist. Among his pilots, for example, hospitals scoring in the top 10% on quality measures for certain conditions will get a 2% reimbursement bonus. He also advocates that medicines ought to be evaluated on the basis of their value to patients. We, the pharmaceutical industry, should welcome that because we would then compete on our ability to truly innovate and drive value. We as an industry have to acknowledge that our high-value products and the success that they have in treating people pose a dilemma for society. The more innovative medicines we create, the more lives are extended, made better, or saved, the more overall healthcare costs rise. Therefore, as we go forward, the research and development that we pursue as companies will necessarily have to incorporate cost effectiveness in the value equation and the criteria we evaluate. That kind of evaluation is new for us. We know it needs to be done. It will add time to our studies, complexity, and cost to our clinical trials. But it will help us make the right decisions further on. I'll give you an example. In the past, recent past, a cancer compound that extended life maybe only 90 days would have been pursued, licensed, and come to market. In the future, there will be some challenging questions around whether or not that gain of 90 days is worth the cost of development and treatment. Those are tough questions. But if we try to control the cost of health care while extending its benefits more broadly across our population, we will increasingly have to deal with tough questions like those. We will actually reduce our total cost if we solve the problem of the uninsured, the 40 to 45 million in this country of people who have no insurance. Today, rather than keeping people without insurance healthy, we wait until they have urgent needs that can't be denied. And as a result, the health care that they do receive costs anywhere from 3 to 10 times what it would if they had a form of coverage that provided regular checkups and access to preventive medicine. We need to extensively educate consumers, all of us, to be smarter shoppers, not only in the price of medicine or insurance plans, but also in the ways that we manage our health and our health care over time. Consumers, I believe, need to have an economic stake in this if we're to succeed. We need to share the cost with consumers because that will drive the kind of behavior that balances cost versus quality of health care. We need to incorporate cost-effectiveness thinking into all the medical decisions we make, and we as consumers of health care need to be part of that. Just as we need to be more rational about treatment decisions, we need to be careful not to so overly regulate ourselves through concerns about safety that we add enormous cost to the system. We have to recognize that all medicine carries risks. The question is whether or not they outweigh the risk of not taking the action. Do we deny a medication to all of those who need it because it comes with a 2% higher risk of side effects than the sugar pill it was tested against? Healthcare is an emotional subject, but as a society, we have to make rational choices and policies. We need to avoid the distractions of phantom solutions such as importation from Canada, solutions that lend themselves to newspaper headlines and public grandstanding, but have little or no bearing on reducing the cost of health care. The truth is that people with insurance in this country don't buy their medications from Canada because their insurance provides them prescription drugs at or below the costs available in Canada. People without insurance, who are generally at less than 200% of the poverty level, have access to a very wide range of free or nearly free medicines in this country, and they don't know it. So to correct this, the pharmaceutical industry has made a major commitment to help people without insurance learn about the many programs available for them, over 150 programs covering over 1,200 medicines, and to help them get the medicines they need for little to no cost. In the past year, PhRMA, the industry's trade association, which I chaired, worked with a broad coalition of patient organizations to pilot a program called the Partnership for Prescription Assistance, or PPA. The PPA provides a free call center and a website through which live representatives on the phone can help patients find the programs for which they're eligible, and the best ones, and the cheapest ones, and then they do the paperwork for them in the phone and mail them the form all filled out to take to their physician, who still has to make the prescription. These pilot sites that we tried in 8 states received approximately 2 million calls. One of the biggest response states was Illinois. Of those 2 million calls, about 1 million people pre-qualified for free or deeply discounted medications. It was such a success that earlier this month we rolled it out nationwide. And since our announcement, the PPA has received an average of 10,000 calls per day. The program will help millions of people get the care they need without resorting to the sometimes drastic and unnecessary measures that have been suggested, such as imposing price controls, changing our system of intellectual property protection, or allowing unsafe imports from foreign countries. The fact is that the cost to regulate the border to ensure the kind of safety that the government imposes within this country would overwhelm the savings that individual consumers receive from cross-border purchases. We need to be careful not to be distracted by oversimplified solutions that have far-reaching and little understood implications. Former Mayor Rudy Giuliani's firm, his consulting firm, just reported that more than 10 million packages of medicines enter the U.S. through the mail each year. And inspections have found that over 85% of those parcels contain drugs that were not FDA approved. We would stop one mad cow at the Canadian border out of fear of safety, but at the same time, we would open the border to countless counterfeits and unsafe drugs coming from anywhere in the world, and then we'd spend an enormous amount of money to try and regulate that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Finally, and I've yet to even mention the single biggest thing that any company or any community or individual consumer can do to keep the cost of healthcare under control, and that's prevention. By prevention, I mean avoiding behaviors like smoking and overeating or eating poorly that result in diseases like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. By eating better, losing weight, exercise, we can shrink our healthcare bill dramatically. We're fighting an epidemic of diabetes in the U.S., and it's only getting worse, the great majority of which can be prevented with education and support to make better choices. There's also a great value to be had in preventive medicine, where the best example today I could cite is statins like Lipitor or Zocor, which are cholesterol-lowering drugs. They do prevent disease and save costs. Today, unfortunately, patient compliance with preventive medicine regimens is less than 30%. So there's a significant long-term opportunity there as well. I didn't expect to give you clean answers tonight, but I have laid out quite a few challenges, and they're realistic challenges. Healthcare, as we all know it, is a massive, multifaceted phenomenon that represents 15% of our economy. We wouldn't expect something of that magnitude to be easy. But as we consider how to answer these challenges and improve our system for the future, there's one critical factor that we should keep in mind, and that's that we can do it. Nothing I've discussed tonight is beyond our skills or our resources. It just requires the will and the right context to fight. In closing, I firmly believe that we cannot begin to formulate meaningful, intelligent solutions to our healthcare cost crisis unless or until we ask ourselves the right questions and put them in the right context. Without that, we're just nibbling at the edges of the problem and very possibly making things worse longer term. Some of the questions are controversial, some are uncomfortable, all of them are tough, but they're questions that we ought to try to answer. My goal tonight was just to share some thoughts on a very large issue that affects us all. We all use health care. We all pay for health care. We're all touched by the changes that are going to come to our system. And we all have a role in deciding what our healthcare system will look like in the future. I hope my thoughts from within the healthcare system will help all of you to frame the debate as it moves forward and to weigh in effectively when it comes to you. The more educated we are, the more we can express our points of view on all of these issues in healthcare, the more likely we are to get better choices and better conclusions. Thank you for providing your leadership on those matters as we go forward. And thank you for honoring me here tonight and letting me opine on my industry. Thanks.
Thank you, Miles. As usual, we have questions to ask, and I think, it's the easiest thing in the world to get up here and talk about your own company, which Miles could have done. And I think I really do appreciate and understand a lot better what goes on in this world relative to our choices in taking care of ourselves in the future. And the questions you posed really are dramatic, and we all need to learn more about this in order to effectively manage it, because it is the most important big number in our budget for this country going forward. So thanks again, really.
Thank you.
All right. Keeping on the theme of broad topics, given the spread of AIDS in the third world continues and throughout the continent of Africa, and the belief that the world is inextricably linked with regard to health care and issues of health, is there a role for the pharmaceutical industry in providing guidance, leadership, and resources to aid countries experiencing the explosion of HIV/AIDS infection?
Well, this is an easy answer because I've had to answer this one a lot. We're one of 6 companies that make AIDS drugs in the world, and we happen to provide the leading or most widely used AIDS drug in the world. There's not only a role for us, there's an obligation for us as pharmaceutical companies to do that because of our unique capabilities. We're the only entities in the world that make AIDS drugs, and we're as close to the disease as anyone can be. There are government agencies, non-governmental organizations, a lot of different faith-based groups and so forth that are all providing resources and care in some fashion, but only pharmaceutical companies are in the unique position to provide medicines in particular in the countries where the AIDS epidemic is so extensive. And so consequently, given that unique role that we have no choice but to be directly involved providing our medicines either free or below our costs, which we all do. And it's little known, I think, in the public. I don't think any of us have patents on our products in Africa or most developing nations. There's been a lot of press about we should open it up to generics. I'll tell you what, any generic company on earth can make our drugs today for those developing markets. They have not shown a willingness thus far to sell them below cost like we do. And so, consequently, again, I think all of us as companies have dealt with the burden of a large portion of the volume we produce going to those areas. We've added capital and expanded our facilities to make more. Some of our companies have out-licensed their patents and technology to others, particularly in South Africa, to make our drugs and provide them at low cost or free. So I think the simple answer is, yes, we have a responsibility and we're exercising it.
Studies show that end-of-life, and you touched on this in your talk, end-of-life health care, often borne by Medicare, represents a huge portion of an individual's lifetime medical costs. In the context of both ethics and public policy, what is the way forward in this country to reach a consensus on the end-of-life issues and the attendant costs?
Well, this is a tough one. I read an article in the New York Times, many of you probably saw a few weeks ago, that said if you want to solve the Medicare crisis, just die earlier. And while it was kind of grim, its real point was that, and I should tell you some background statistics, about 28% of the cost you will incur in health care in your entire lifetime is spent in your last year. And a lot of that cost isn't well spent. And so I raised the issue earlier, what do we do with terminal illnesses? How do we deal with them? And the article basically was dealing with that question, that this is a tough question, but there are circumstances where when we're dealing with terminal illness, there are wiser choices for care to alleviate suffering and pain, hospice care, et cetera, that are better choices than some of the incredibly expensive technologies and medicines that we apply. The difficulties in making the determination which case is which. And I think that that's a difficult and emotional one for all of us in dealing with our family members or ourselves as we go forward. But frankly, an awful lot of the cost of our healthcare system is spent there, and probably not well.
Okay, last question tonight is a softball for you. Describe the benefits of Abbott's diversified portfolio of business and products, and why is it preferable to the pure play pharmaceutical or device businesses that were being broadly advocated just a few years ago?
So this is probably a good time for me to give Cranes a plug. I didn't know about this article until I walked into my house tonight, and my wife said, gee, you were on the front of Cranes today, and Gloria Scobie kindly brought me a copy here tonight so I could see what Cranes had written. And the article basically says Abbott's trying to be the next J&J. We are the only two companies in our industry that are a broad, diverse mix of businesses, and that's by design. I think that being a pure-play pharmaceutical company, especially in a business as high risk as the development of pharmaceuticals is a very risky thing for investors, and you can see that in the ups and downs of some of the peer companies that are in our peer group. We've always been a more diverse model. We believe that helps us to balance our investments. It helps us balance a lot of different kinds of risks, research risk, reimbursement risk, geographic risks, and so forth. We believe we can turn out more stable growth and earnings over time, and that also allows us to invest at a more predictable and stable rate in all of our high-growth businesses. So we like that model much better than one that could, in a volatile way, yank our company up and down in terms of our investments and spending. In a business like ours, where some of the research and development cycle is as much as 9 or 10 years, you've got to have a certain stability in there in order to sustain your investments in research, and I think being a much broader, diverse model of high growth and profitable businesses has served our investors and the sustainability of our company pretty well. I think it's obviously sustained J&J pretty well, and the two of us have tended to outperform the pure play companies, certainly over the last 5 years, and I take that as evidence that we're right.
Once again, thank you, Miles, very much for sharing your insights on a very topic that's important to everybody in this room. So thanks again. And the evening is adjourned. Safe travel home.